Morning everyone, come on in. Come on in everyone, there's plenty of seats at the front. Hope you're all awake. Come on in everyone. Come down to the front, there's lots of seats. Come on in. Don't be shy. Come on in everyone. Take a seat. Okay, good morning everyone. I'm going to get started. It's lovely to see so many of you here. I hope that woke you up. It certainly woke me up. Welcome to the first day of AltC 24. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here with us this year. We know how difficult it is at the moment to get funding, to get time to come to these events. So we're always grateful for those of you that managed to attend and to get so involved in the event during the week. I'm going to start with some just housekeeping and things. I'm Kerry Pinney, I'm Alt's Chief Operations Officer, and I'm just going to talk you through a few things around the conference so that you know what you're doing before handing over to our co-chairs. So firstly, if you haven't spotted it, there is a map out the front, but there's a map here as well. So at the moment we're in the Manchester suite, and as you can see, all of the rooms for today are on this ground floor area here. 2 at the back, the Brussels and Milano, and then the Dublin and 104 over there. There's also a quiet space as well, so please use that for sort of quiet working or just taking a break as well. That's just for that sort of thing. Please don't go in there and have big meetings or anything like that. But that's a nice quiet space if you just need a bit of time, to get away and relax a little bit. There's no fire alarms planned that I'm aware of, so if a fire alarm does go off, we'll need to make our way outside to the front of the building there, and we'll be directed by staff where to go from there. So nothing planned at least. If you haven't spotted it already as well, there's a QR code there if you need to go and grab the programme. So the programme is available online to download, and that's just a brief idea of the day, the sort of overview of the day for today. So we're going to start with our keynote with Chris Friend, and then we'll go into our sessions throughout the day. There's plenty of time after each session for Q&A and for discussion, and we've tried to leave as much time as possible as well for sort of networking and breaks and things like that, so you've got plenty of time during the day just to come down and relax. Every day, if there's any changes to the programme, I will let you know, but today at least there are no changes to the programme. Everything is where it's planned to be and at the time it's supposed to be as well. If you want to join us and join our conversations as well during the event, we have various ways to do that. So we've got our Discord channel as well, so that's for those who are joining us online. We have the Discord channel, so they'll be chatting there. So if you want to interact with those people that are watching the live streams online, then you can do that as well. There's also going to be lots of little games and other things and other activities on there. And also it's a space, if you're one of the speakers and you want to share any resources after the session, there's also a space in the Discord for you to share any resources. Some of you will have seen last week that we have decided to leave X, Twitter. We're no longer using that, so you won't find any conversation, at least from Alt, on Twitter. But if you do want to follow our hashtags, Rich Goodman, who is our social media guru, will be tweeting on Blue Sky, Mastodon predominantly, and perhaps some from LinkedIn on occasion. So if you do want to follow the conversation and follow our accounts, please do follow us there. If you haven't heard it, when you're out there in the exhibition area, we've got a brilliant radio programme as well. So for those of you online as well, that's throughout the day. You can drop in and listen to live interviews and discussion, but also some pre-recorded and sort of archive material, music, chats, discussion, all sorts of things throughout the day, and you'll be able to listen to them back later as well. And a big thank you to Dom, who is the sort of radio mastermind who put this together. We did it for the first time last year. We've done it again this year. So if you fancy watching any of the many events or listening to them throughout the day, there's a whole programme of sort of side and fringe events on the radio as well. Lots of live interviews with different people as well throughout the week. Award winners, we've got some of the team here, some of the delegates and speakers as well doing interviews throughout. Just a reminder for those of you here in Manchester, in every room we are live streaming constantly. So if you want to go and have a chat in there or have a meeting, it's not the best place. It is constantly live. So just, if you want to say anything rude, say it in the corridors. Don't say anything you wouldn't want anybody else to hear, at least in the rooms. It's constantly live streaming, and we've got a brilliant AV team as well. So if you're speaking at all throughout the event, just give the AV team a shout, and they'll come in and help you and help you get sorted out. Just a word about the way that the sessions will run as well. So the sessions will run in the order that they're listed in the programme, so they're all in the order that they'll start. And then all of the Q&A will happen at the end. So there's time at each end of each session, there's time included to ensure that there's time for Q&A for people to ask their questions as well. If you haven't grabbed it, it should have been given to you on the way in, which is our scavenger hunt. So if you go around and you visit all of our exhibitors today, you'll be able to put yourself into the prize draw. One of the prizes, the top prize, is a free ticket to next year's event. So if you haven't picked that up, go and grab it. Go around, talk to all the exhibitors. It's no exaggeration to say that if we didn't have exhibitors and sponsors, the event wouldn't happen, because it really wouldn't if we didn't have them. So please do go and give them a little bit of love and a little bit of attention for us. Tonight we've got our drinks reception at 5 o'clock, so once all the sessions are finished, come and join us just outside in the exhibition area for some drinks, and then there's some informal meetups as well later on after that in Manchester, which is run by Puyin, who's at the back. Give everyone a wave, Puyin. So if you're interested in going along to the Boom Battle Bar later on for some games and drinks and things, then just get in touch with Puyin at the back there, and she'll get you sorted for later on. Big thank you to all of our exhibitors. Our headline sponsors, Anthology, will speak in a moment, and a huge thank you to them for sponsoring us. We have a lot of people that work with us and partner with us and sponsor us to put these events together, and we're really grateful to them for their continued interest and support of ALT and helping us to put these events together. Also, a really big thank you to everyone else who helps to put this conference together. There's obviously the ALT staff team, but there's a lot of people here who have helped in various ways to put this event together, from the conference committee, who I've listed there, who all help to shape this conference, think of speakers and put things like that together, but also people like Rich and Puyin and Dave and Dom, who are doing all sorts of fringe events and different things on the side to help us put this together. So a huge thank you to them, and to all of the speakers and people who are going to be interviewed on the radio, and all of the people who are chairing sessions. You know, without all these people volunteering their time to help us put this together, it just simply wouldn't happen. So thank you all very much. I'm going to hand over now to our co-chairs, to Scott and Diane. So Scott and Diane have sort of put this conference together, decided their theme, picked the keynote speakers, and do a huge amount to kind of shape the feel and the programme, and keeping the committee running and working together. So a big thank you to Scott and Diane. So I'll just welcome Scott and Diane.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Manchester. And it's not raining, which is one thing to celebrate. I'm Diane Bennett. As it says, I'm teaching and learning manager at the University of Manchester, leading a team which focuses on online professional postgraduate courses, learning designer team.
And I'm Scott Farrow, so I'm head of digital learning at Edge Hill University. If people aren't familiar with where Edge Hill is, which a lot of people aren't, we're sort of in the centre of a triangle between Manchester, Liverpool and Preston.
You're all familiar with the themes. When we were thinking about this and talking about this, we first of all had a bit of a brainstorm about what things were important to us, what we were interested in. We had a look at previous conferences. We didn't really want to duplicate what happened last year. And we also thought about things that were important to us, and then had a look at the ALT's annual survey for last year, this year, whichever way you want to, the last one, and came up with these themes. We felt it was important that people to be able to take things away from the conference and hopefully implement some of the ideas in their own workplaces. And I think it's been really interesting seeing how a lot of the speakers have interpreted these themes and run with them.
And as Kerry just alluded to, obviously the conference couldn't work without all of the people that have been involved in the committee, and also the fringe events. So I just wanted to take a minute to put our hands together to thank all the committee and to thank everybody that's been involved in putting the programme together. So thank you very much. I'd also just like to mention special thanks to the ALT team, particularly Katie for getting me and Diane kind of through this process. I think when we both kind of agreed to do this about 9 months ago, and I say we both agreed to do it, I think I strong-armed Diane into it. It was one of those things where you kind of think, you put yourself out of your comfort zone and sign up to do something and worry about it later. And unfortunately, we're at the day now where we're now worrying about it later. But hope you enjoy the programme that we've put together. We've got over 100 sessions online, obviously online and in person for you guys here in Manchester. And between the two kind of modes of delivery, we've got over 300 delegates. And as Kerry alluded to, especially in the challenging times we're in at the moment for higher education institutions kind of struggling with finances, we appreciate that CPD is kind of the first thing that usually drops off. So really appreciate seeing everybody here in person today.
So now I'd like to introduce our headline sponsor, Dom from Anthology.
Hey, good morning everyone, and thank you for allowing Anthology to be here today. So for those of you that don't know who I am, my name's Dom Gore and I lead our Blackboard product management team for Anthology. We're really excited to be the headline sponsor for AltC this year in Manchester. Can we make sure we've got the slides coming up if we've got them here? There we are, perfect. So for those of you that don't know who we are, Anthology is an organisation that supports kind of a holistic kind of focus around educational technology. Many of you kind of know us as an organisation that has Blackboard at the kind of the core teaching and learning solution, but we also support things around our kind of customer relationship management as well as student information systems. So if you wanted to know a little bit more about who we are, this is kind of the area that we have. We've actually just gone through a bit of a rebranding process. You can kind of see this one here. One of the things that we have now as a tagline is something we call the power of together. And I think this is really, really important. It really aligns around kind of the themes that we have for the conference this year, because it's not just about kind of the power of the technology coming together, it's about the power of the community as well and that collaboration. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of Diane and Scott just said then, and obviously the themes for this year's AltC conference. One of the things that underpins that power of together kind of message that we have is kind of 4 key themes that we have around innovation, reflection, continuous improvement and collaboration, which really uniquely align to those kind of 4 key areas that we have for the AltC conference this year. And if we dive a little deeper into that one, first of all, collaboration. Everything that we do from an Anthology perspective, specifically around Blackboard, is built in collaboration with our clients and our partners directly. We build the technology with the feedback that we gain from institutions, from clients, from faculty, from student, from professional services people, instructional designers, learning technologists, and obviously we've kind of moved that one forward. And if you want to learn a bit more about how we do that, how you may get involved if you do use our technology or want to learn more, do come and see us on stand 5 here at the conference out in the hall. To give you some idea of what that means, I always like to try and quantify that. It's all very well talking about it, but have some indications around it. We have something called the Anthology Ideas Exchange, which is really where institutions and people can kind of vote on ideas, put ideas forward for kind of improvement in respect to the technology we have around Blackboard. Over 450 ideas submitted have actually gone inside the product area. Nearly 8,000 votes from institutions globally. We run weekly focus group sessions as well, every single week across all time zones, including Europe, Middle East, Africa, as well as America, and obviously APAC as well. And we also have a number of office hours as well that kind of gain that feedback. And as we kind of think about the collaboration piece, it's never a more important time to think about gaining that feedback. And we heard a little bit about that from what Scott and Diane said then. It's a really interesting and obviously very challenging time that we're seeing in higher education. Certainly from my perspective, being in higher ed now for nearly 15 years, I've kind of seen these trends. It's never been more of a challenging time. And a lot of these things are obviously global impact as well, areas we see in the US, but very much impacting the UK. And I just wanted to kind of drill down very quickly on one area, which is obviously very, very kind of, crucial for a lot of institutions, a polarizing topic around artificial intelligence. It's never been more of a polarizing topic. We've got lots of kind of opportunities with that technology, but also issues and kind of challenges that are around that one. And I wanted to take a little bit of time to think and talk a little bit about kind of how we're moving that one forward. So Anthology does want to be a leader in responsible use of AI. This is not just about using artificial intelligence. It's not using the technology for technology's sake just because it's areas and things that are out in the market. We want to lead that. We want to take that opportunity of working with institutions, working with our partners to lead directly in that space. And one of the things that we launched last year, we actually highlighted at this Alt-C last year, was our trustworthy AI framework. Things that institutions have the ability to opt into technology. Humans always in control. We know that there are technologies, artificial intelligence does hallucinate, so having people in that control is really important. And obviously addressing the big piece around data privacy concerns as well. And we've done a lot over the course of the last year since launching our technologies, market engagements. We've actually launched white papers. Do come and see us on Stand 5. We've actually got that documentation you can take away with you as well. And we actually have information around institutions who want to move forward with this, but are yet to understand around policy and obviously governance specifically around that area. So we've done a lot of that work. One of the things I always like to kind of talk a little bit about is putting that practice, taking that information and putting it into practice. And we actually launched a solution called the AI Design Assistant last year. A lot of people came to our booth, a lot of people kind of engaged with that one. Lots of institutions who are here as well are also using that technology. And obviously this is really about supporting that inspiration, that design process as we're starting to move into the academic start of the academic year, and obviously having instructors and instructor designers creating their course content. And over the course of the last 12 months, we've had significant improvement on this one as well. Lots of great feedback from instructors globally around how these types of technologies are saving time. And this is something that's really been effective for them. But innovation and continuous improvement, and obviously reflecting on that, is a key theme of this year's conference. And the AI Design Assistant is just one opportunity, one area that we've kind of invested in and working with our institutions and obviously with our clients around how we can move those things forward and how can we enhance the teaching and learning experience. And I want to kind of leave you with 3 other areas, and I'd love you to come and talk to us about this on Stand 5. Again, if we're starting the new academic semester, instructors are building their course content. We've launched something called the Content Designer to provide flexible and more powerful ways to design content, to have that workflow, and to support that continuous development and improvement. Video, a significant area of focus, certainly here in the UK. Lots of institutions leverage video technology to support that engagement. We've released a solution around our lightweight video editing solution that provides that capability of multimodal course design, again, improving that student engagement. And then I wanted to finally leave you with this. Obviously, a big focus for us has been that content design piece, but thinking about how do the students engage in a manner that is meaningful and obviously a thoughtful exposure to student engagement. And one of the things we've also launched, and we would love to show and talk to you about how you may want to use this for your teaching and learning, is something we call the AI conversation, which allows that kind of Socratic debate type of approach, providing that opportunity for students to reflect on that as well. So again, very quick, we really appreciate having the opportunity to be your headline sponsors. Do come and speak to us. My colleagues are here over the course of the next 3 days, and I really hope you have a wonderful next 3 days here in Manchester. Thank you.
Thank you, Dom.
This is when I wish I had long legs like this lot.
Sorry, bear with me. Just rerunning Dom's slides for him while we get back to it. Get there in a second. Okay, so we just wanted to take a few seconds before we invite Ethan from VBox onto the stage to introduce VBox as the audience participation sponsor. This was one of the polls that was run this time last year, and we were asking participants to kind of look at the next 12 months, what might kind of crop up in terms of things on the horizon. So I think it's quite kind of interesting to kind of look at the dynamic of some of the things that people were reflecting on last year, particularly, you know, relating to what Don was just saying about AI. We've got quite a mix there in terms of AI, in terms of more AI panic, but actually the opposite as well. I think we probably are a little bit further on this at this point in time than we were last year in terms of the panic. But again, you know, relating to some of the things we've said, and Kerry said this morning, a couple of things that pop out for me are the climate of higher education and the word change. I think we're definitely at that point. And then another one that popped out for me was the Twitter dying, which I think we're pretty much at that stage already. I'm not sure if there's anything that pops out for you, Diane.
I think for me, the authentic assessment was interesting, and I'm hoping that we can have some discussions about how that's progressed or maybe hasn't progressed, because I think it's been a big topic of debate. And again, I think it was not just the AI, but the various AI comments here, because it just represents, I think, the variety of views that still continue to exist around AI. And I think then the restructures and the change that is ongoing in higher education and certainly in online learning is still very evident. So before I introduce Ethan, we just want to, VVox is our audience engagement partner for the conference. It's going to be running throughout the conference, so please ask questions, make comments, give feedback during the keynotes and the sessions. We want to have the opportunity for people here and online to have as much interaction as possible. So if I can introduce, where's he gone, Ethan, from the Customer Success Manager from VVox.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Diane. My name is Ethan. I'm here from VVox. We're just really on a mission to help make your classes more engaging and more unmissable. So my job today is quite simple. It's just to break the ice, really. So if we can switch over to VVox, grab your phones. I think you know the drill now. Should be coming up any moment. Get your phones at the ready. Any moment it will be on screen. Alternatively, you all have some cards in front of you or on your seats. The joining instructions are on there too. So go to vvox.app and put in the 9-digit ID that's on there. Brogan, if you could open up, my colleague Brogan is in the back helping today. If you could open up the first poll, and it should say for you, what are you most looking forward to at this year's conference, or something along those lines. And any second, I'm sure we'll have the live view building on screen. Next one, please, Brogan. There you go. All right, I can see it in front of me on that screen. Well, yeah, do pop your things in. You can enter more than one kind of thing in there. So there's lots of things so far. I'll just read out what I can see because you can't see it on screen just yet. But lots of things about networking, new ideas, catching up. Not seeing too much about, so as AI and assessment. There we go. I've just seen the Gaster in there. Haven't caught up with Tom yet, but if there's a Gaster, then I'm looking forward to it. If you haven't experienced it yet, then that's good fun. That's awesome. Yeah, networking, that is definitely such an awesome thing to be doing. And just, it's a really nice thing to be doing here. So, that looks really good. Let's go ahead and close up that word cloud. And we've got one more, and that's just repeating the one that Scott and Dan just showed up on screen. So, what is your prediction for the coming year in EdTech? So that we can be here in a year's time today and reflect back again. So first one up there was accessibility. I know that's something that is coming up more and more at Vivox, so that probably means it's coming up more and more everywhere. More AI, AI dominance. Yeah, starting to see a theme that was similar to last year. So yeah, that's great. We'll leave that open for a minute longer, but I think it's probably my time to get off the stage. But thanks everyone. That's my job done for today. I'll see you back up here tomorrow. Yeah, I'm from Vivox. We're on one of the stands outside. I don't know which number, but please do come and have a chat with us. Thank you.
So yeah, I just want to kind of re-highlight, I know Kerry just went over this, but just in terms of engagement throughout the conference, so again, for people in person and people online, we've obviously got the Discord and the socials, which Kerry mentioned, so kind of follow those feeds. The hashtag is AltC24 for this year, and then just want to highlight the drinks reception tonight in the lobby, and then we've got the gala dinner and the awards tomorrow, and if you are unfortunate enough to not be here for the 3 days, then do tune in with the Alt-C radio once you're back at your desks as well to follow across the next couple of days too.
So we've got a couple of minutes before we invite Chris to the lectern. So we thought we'd just give you a chance to start that networking and thinking about the ideas that came up just now on the Vivox poll and things that you're hoping to see during the conference. If you could just, the usual, turn to the people on your table and just have a chat amongst yourselves. Just have a couple of minutes just to think about what you're hoping to get from the conference, your highlights, where you're going to go, and share ideas.
I'm really glad that Diane's got a lecturer's voice. I don't have to do that bit.
Okay, everybody, it's time now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Chris Friend.
Yeah, delighted to introduce Chris up onto the stage for you as your first keynote for Alt24 this year. I've followed Chris's work for a couple of years now. Actually came across Chris's work a few years ago after, I was trying to think this morning which year it was, but Jesse Stommel keynoted quite a few years ago at Alt-C. And then Jesse and Chris and a couple of colleagues worked together a few years after. That's where I became aware of Chris's work. If you're familiar with Chris's work yourself, then you know we've got a great keynote coming up. And if you're not familiar with Chris's work before now, hopefully there'll be something in there that inspires you to keep up with the work that he's doing and things through his website as well. So Chris is Assistant Professor of English in New Media in New Jersey at Kane University, I've been told is how you pronounce it this morning. He's a teacher, a speaker, a podcaster, and he specialises in simplifying and humanising technology. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Diane. Thank you to Katie also. And where can I go and not get feedback? I think that's good. Try that. And there we are. Good morning, everyone. Just because irony loves to, work, I'm going to be up here talking to you about how we can humanize education. And I'm doing that with technology that has glitched a whole bunch this morning, and things aren't going to look quite as they're supposed to up on the slide. So I'm kind of calling myself out in the process of giving this talk, which I think is lovely. And yes, it is pronounced Kane. That is not just the American accent. I don't know why it's pronounced that way. It's a family name. I think, I don't even know where we're going with that one. But I do hope that you are able to understand me through the accent this morning. I do want to start by thanking Scott and Katie and Diane for the invitation, for getting me here, for making this all work. And in the interest of accessibility, there we are, that QR code will take you to a blog post where the transcript of this talk is available for you, as well as the slides, which will actually look as they're supposed to look. So you get a little bonus for going there. And if you're like me and get distracted by trying to follow along with two things at one time, I promise you I will put that URL back up on the screen at the end of the talk so that you can go and check what you missed, that sort of thing, or see what I was supposed to say before I completely lost track of what I was talking about, and go from there. So I want to start by kind of going back in time about 4 years to when everything broke, back when the pandemic started. And we all had to do that quote unquote pivot to figure out how in the world we were going to do education these days. And I want to argue that we decided, instead of recreating and reinventing things and tools and solutions to help with the problem that we barely understood at that point, we kind of just re-entrenched things that we had been doing before. We missed an opportunity 4 years ago to think, hey, how could school work if we wanted to make this into something that it hadn't been before? And instead, we kind of said, well, what do we already have on hand that we can use right now to put a Band-Aid over this problem without reinventing anything? So I want to go back 4 years and kind of put ourselves back in that mindset, not of the misery and suffering that is very real and I'm not going to gloss over, but into that feeling of what could we do? What might we do? And the question that I want to throw out here is, how could education look? How could teaching, learning, and learning technologies look if we got to redesign them with humanity at its core rather than techno-solutionism at its core? Because I think those are two very different approaches to things. So back when we decided that Zoom was going to be the solution to all of the world's problems, we then realized that, oh my gosh, my mic is muted, you can't see me, where's my breakout room? We created more problems for ourselves than we solved in the interest of trying to get ourselves a quick fix to things. And one of the things that we realized was that people don't need to be saved by these technological solutions. People need care. We need to care for each other. And it's coming up with technological solutions to support care, to encourage human connection that allows us to care for each other, I think is one of the greatest challenges of technology. Spoiler alert, I don't plan on talking about AI at all in my talk today. For those of you who are hoping to hear about that, chat with me out in the hallway. I've got more than my fair share of ideas on that one. I'm a writing teacher by trade, and I'm kind of excited for what's going to happen this semester when everyone loses their minds over AI coming out and having writing tools really simple, because I think that in my world, we're going to get to focus on what's actually important about writing and the human side of writing rather than the terror of a blank page or everyone obsessing over grammar and all that. But again, chat with me in the hall if you want to talk more about that one. Instead of discussing artificial intelligence, I want to talk about the people behind our technology and how our tech can be used to have our people, to bring out the connections between people. So I argue that education shouldn't be based on the technological solutions of efficiency, duplicability, and standardization. Those are kind of the goals of a lot of ed tech that I see. But instead, yeah, see, I told you it's not supposed to look like that. Well, yeah, anyway. Instead, technology education should be about the human solutions of empathy, understanding, and genuine connection between people. And finding ways to make technology get us to those points is, I think, the challenge that we all face, and what I want to try and dive into today. To get there, let me start by talking about the loss of connection that we've all experienced since 2020 or so. I have way too many screens to look at right now. I need to decide what I want to pay attention to. Holy cow. I'm getting ridiculously messed up. And I've also now talked through, yeah, great. Because I'm going off script, I managed to talk 2 slides ahead, and we already did all of that, so cool. With today's learning technologies, we also experienced a loss of participation whenever we try to get classes and education to work with our tech. And this is a thing that I think my friends at Vivox are going to call me out on this. I'm curious to see how engagement works in a space like this. Theoretically, there might be a conversation going on online that I'm not even aware of while I'm standing up here. And we are trying to build in these solutions to allow folks to engage with us in this space while they are online. And finding ways to bridge those gaps, I think, is always a challenge. But I think what we need to remember is when folks are trying to participate online, they need to participate with other people. I think the old joke of if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound, applies to online engagement, where if there's a comment being made in a discussion thread in an online presentation right now, and the presenter isn't reading the chat room, is that comment even worth anything? And if you think about social media posts, they get their value from the audience response to them. A post is considered good or successful or whatever based on how many people like it or repost it or that sort of thing. How do we measure engagement if we're paying attention to the response that people create rather than the content itself? Or put differently, if we are creating content and putting it out there online, how are we able to attend to that reaction, that response? How are we giving opportunity for people to give us feedback on the content that we're creating? We also had, there we go, the pandemic lockdown has also highlighted a loss of participation that we've all experienced. And I would argue that we do this even in person, in physical spaces. In a classroom environment, I'm used to people saying that class participation is often graded and that sort of thing, and it's usually determined by what a student does that the teacher notices. We often define class participation by how the teacher hears from a student. And why aren't we thinking of this in terms of what the students do for one another? Why aren't we thinking of class participation in terms of how students benefit one another, what benefit they derive from their colleagues? In an in-person class, at least at my institutions, I've not seen that too often. I think a lot of times our class spaces are still teacher-centric rather than student-centric. And so one of the challenges I want to offer is how we can make even our physical spaces more reliant on our actual physical presence rather than what a student does to show the teacher that they're there or something to that effect. Pardon. So today I want to basically ask that we reimagine how we could have rebuilt the world during the beginnings of the pandemic lockdown. When we knew that everything was broken, I want to reimagine how education could have worked if we rebuilt it around our people instead of our tech, looking for solutions that are based on empathy and agency instead of our tools and devices. I want to imagine education that uses empathy as the foundation for its places, its policies, and its platforms. And I promise you that animation was supposed to look a lot slicker than it just did. I'll make this. I'll make it work. We'll be all right. I want to do a deep dive into empathy-driven education here, starting at the personal, individual level by talking about the role of place in learning. Then I want to zoom out a little bit and take a look at how empathy works in social scenarios enacted through policies that we might enact in our schools. And then I want to go even broader and look at a more systemic approach, applying empathy to platforms. Basically, my goal is to show how we can use humanity to shape learning technologies, basically at every level with every engagement. And I want to introduce to you what I call humane technology, the idea of technology that is driven by people and that has people and their humanity and their agency at its core. But let's start smaller and focus on places. When we think of care, when we think of how to represent care, the most common way of reflecting that or illustrating that is through a hug, or even like the icon of people hugging or that sort of thing. That's generally the mental association people get. Thinking of how to hug someone virtually kind of breaks my head. And so the idea of how do we care for one another virtually, I think is a huge fundamental challenge, because the way we default to thinking of caring for others would be to read facial expressions, to share a moment, share an experience, to hug one another and provide that physical support. Those are things that can't be reproduced virtually. And so when we think of how to care for and support our people, our students, you name it, it requires a great deal of creativity and deep thought into how we can reproduce or how we can provide space for the kinds of care that we want to offer for one another. It gets even harder when we work to connect with each other virtually. We're looking at each other through our screens, and we generally don't care for our technology. We don't care for our screens, and yet we are seeing one another mediated through these screens. And so if I am having a video call with somebody and I want to be able to demonstrate or perform care for them, it gets more difficult through a screen than it does in person, because I have to get past that two-dimensional representation and imagine the person on the other side of that communication rather than having them right there. So we've got a lot of challenges kind of preventing us from expressing and demonstrating care in education, especially digitally. I want to talk about two myths of education that I think get in our way and come up with some antidotes to enacting empathy regardless of our modality. The first myth that I want to kind of break down a bit is the myth of virtualization, or the idea of distance learning. In my country, we often talk about meeting students where they are. I'm not sure if that's a phrase that transfers easily. I'm seeing some nods, so you're familiar with it. A lot of times when we say meet students where they are, we mean intellectually. We want to meet them with the knowledge and experience they have and then help them get to the next step. What if we instead took that phrase, meet students where they are, very, very literally and thought about their physical spaces? I've taught online classes before, and thinking about an online class as existing online kind of breaks down the education or the learning process, because all students are always learning in a physical space. When we have a virtual class, the class itself might be online, but the students are always somewhere. They're always in their dorms. They're always at home. They're always at a coffee shop, or sometimes they're attending, using air quotes here, attending class while in their car or on the train, going from one errand to another, one job to another. And if we forget that classes and learning happen in those spaces, we are losing those students. We are disconnecting from their experience. So the first kind of myth I want to break down is the idea that we can have distant learning. It isn't. We always have to remember that learning is always local, that learning is always in a place. As a quick example of how this goes crazy, That happens to be Hurricane Henri. Hurricane Henri followed me whenever I moved from Florida to New Jersey back in 2021. Most people in my country, when they move to a suburban area, like bring a bottle of wine and they have a backyard barbecue. I bring a climate event and 3 days of flash flooding. New Jersey is not made for hurricanes, and so the damage that happened when that thing showed up, it was pretty severe. I came from Florida where I'm like, hurricane, whatever, it's a big deal. It's just a bunch of rain and we're fine. But in New Jersey, these things are serious because they're not used to them. When we had 2 hurricanes go through within a month, that was disastrous. My school ceased to exist online. Both times Hurricanes Henri and Ida came through, in both cases, we just fell off the internet. Like, my school ceased to exist because our server room was brilliantly positioned right next to a creek. That creek overflowed, flooded the server room, and there we go. And I was laughing because, you know, we talk about virtual distance learning, and distance learning at my school became hyper-localized because our online classes didn't exist, because our school in New Jersey was having problems, and all of a sudden all of that just went away because of that one very physical, very local problem. It got to the point where, you know, students couldn't get to school because their cars couldn't go through the water. Sure, electrons couldn't go to school because we were disconnected from the web. Crazy. So instead of thinking of distance learning, I want to argue that all learning always takes place in real physical spaces, and we have to remember that to make any kind of engagement with students work. The second myth of education is that of standardization. I want to argue that standardization isn't a thing, shouldn't be a thing, can't effectively be a thing, something to that effect. Standardization is kind of this thing that we all drool over because it makes things simple, predictable, reproducible. And in terms of systems design, it's great if we know what the inputs are going to be, the outputs are going to be predictable as well. So, like, I get why standardization is such a draw, but there is no such thing as a standardized student. Every student has a different situation, different environment, different ideas, different thinking, different approach to the way that they learn, different needs, you name it. And once we forget that, once we expect our students to be standardized, we're just not serving anybody. As an example, back in 1947, the United States Air Force was trying to kind of get off the ground, pun intended, I suppose, and they had a major problem. That's probably another pun. I apologize. I need to stop doing that. They were doing training for pilots, and when they got started, they reached a peak of 17 pilot fatalities per day in training. They realized their cockpit design was to blame. Pilots weren't able to work the planes the way they were supposed to. Come to find out, the predecessor to the Air Force had measured, oh gosh, I'm looking at my notes for the number because I don't want to misquote anything here. Shoot. They designed their original cockpit around the average pilot. You see where this whole story is going. Eventually, the Air Force realized cockpit design was a problem, so they measured 140 different body dimensions across 4,000 pilots, compiled all of that data together, found the average measurements for all 140. Then they focused on the 10 most important, most critical pilot measurements and looked at that study of 4,000 pilots. Exactly 0 pilots fit the average measurement on those 10 most critical measurements. 0 out of 4,000. If you add a margin of error of 30% to those numbers, 0 pilots fit the average measurement across those 10 most critical measurements. So if we design a cockpit for the average pilot, we are designing a cockpit that fits exactly 0 pilots. If we are designing a class for the average student, we are designing a class for exactly 0 students. We have to build some kind of flexibility into the way we design our tools, the way we design our classes, the way we design our course material. What was I about to say? Their solution was to build a customizable cockpit. So when every pilot got in, they were able to make adjustments to make the cockpit suit their needs, their body, their measurements. And that solved that whole fatality problem that they had. Fun thing is, we are used to a great solution to this problem in our everyday lives. When we go to a restaurant, The restaurant menu tells us what to expect. It sets out a framework for the kind of meal we're about to engage in. We know the sort of overview of the pacing. We know what will be involved. We know the basic components. Different restaurants offer different sorts of things and all that. But then, of course, within each section of the menu, we are able to customize our experience to meet our needs, our in-the-moment preferences, that sort of thing. So I want to suggest that offering menus is a great solution to the problem, I'm going to say, of standardization as a draw. So if we're designing classes, offer students a menu of options for assignments. That way, we can keep things within the framework of what's expected for the course, and students have the freedom and flexibility to choose the option that works best for them. It also works great for homework assignments. Offer a selection of options that students can read. They can pick whichever one works best for them and run with it. I do this in my classes all the time. Anytime I assign a reading, I always give like 3, 4 different choices. And I usually advise them, hey, if you're this kind of a major, this option's going to work best for you. If you're that major, then this one's probably going to be of more interest. Sometimes it's even if this material is hard for you, go with this option that's going to be a little bit easier, a little bit more accommodated. It'll get you the basics as you go. If you're feeling really comfortable with this, challenge yourself with a more advanced version. You're going to get more out of that, but it's also not for the faint at heart. So if you're struggling, aiming for that, it's probably not going to work. That way, everyone in class shows up with something in their head to be able to discuss, and all students are able to engage with one another about the material that I want to talk about in class, and we can get through the stuff. They can all contribute their own learning. And before we start thinking, the advanced students reading the harder material are going to be getting more out of it than the students reading the easier stuff, that's not the case. They're all on equal footing, because students who read the easier material still read something that the other students didn't. They still have a responsibility to contribute. They're still able to say, oh, I understand that because of what I read, and they can engage with each other that way. I find that having groups talk about whatever they read off of the menu works really well, because then they all have that different angle, and they're all curious about what the other students read and what they didn't get into. To stretch this metaphor perhaps a little bit too far, the idea of ordering off menu at a restaurant is kind of fashionable in certain circles, where people, they're a little extra and they want to prove that they know how to break the system by ordering this thing that only cool people know about, or whatever, right? The same thing applies in classes. If students have the ability to do the equivalent of ordering off menu, they could say, oh, I've got this other reading that I think is relevant, can I read that instead? Or if we give them an option, a list of options for projects, and say, if you've got a better idea, here's the goal of the project. As long as you come up with something that does this goal, that's great. Students then can feel empowered, and they can feel a little extra, and they can say, oh, I'd rather do this instead. And as long as we understand what the goal of the project is, great. So it kind of empowers them and gets them to think a little bit outside the box, or a little bit more creatively, take a little bit more ownership over their learning. And there was one other point that I wanted to make, and again, my brain is just not keeping up. Holy cow. Nope, it's gone. Idea's totally gone. So that takes me to the solution to the second problem that I introduced of standardization. There is no such thing as a standard student, and we should be designing all of our systems, our classes, and all that for choice, not standardization. And the thing that I forgot just came back into my head, sorry. The idea of menus and options also applies if you're building a program at school, and you've got, let's say, adjunct lecturers. Adjuncts need a lot of support, and they don't have the time or resources available to build things for themselves. So if we have, I come from the writing world, so we've got, writing classes are often taught by adjuncts. If we're able to say, here's a class, here is the set of topics that you're going to be discussing, here are a series of options for the different projects you could do, the different modules that you could do, the different lessons you could teach, that sort of thing, and give faculty the option to select from that list, it reduces their workload by giving them possible solutions, but it also doesn't disempower them. One of the things I often see about adjuncts teaching new classes is they are handed a course and told, teach this. And it's done out of the best of intentions. It is, we're going to help take the design burden off of you. We're going to give you a class that's ready to go, and you can just run with it, which sounds great, but from the adjunct's perspective, they are completely disempowered, and they're being told they have to teach this, only this, nothing but this, and they have no control over it. So if we just add that little layer of flexibility of, here's what you need to do, here are some options for how you can do it. If you want to go off script, order off menu, talk to us, we can work this out. But giving that flexibility allows someone to quickly and easily customize a course to work well for them. So I say this works at pretty much any level. So I want to pause for a quick second. I have avoided using the word personalization in all of this talk, this anti-standardization talk. I'm avoiding the word personalization very intentionally. Personalization is often used in the tech industry for targeted content, specifically and especially in terms of advertising, designed to make ads more seductive, more appealing, and that sort of thing. My institution is transitioning from Google to Microsoft 365 right now. That's going to be a fun little project. We get to figure out how that's going to work. They wanted to roll it out in a month. I just sat in the back and laughed. Now we're rolling it out in a semester. Still kind of chuckling, but we'll see how this goes. When we were a Google school, I noticed that we would pay Google for all of the student accounts, and students would sign up for their accounts to be able to engage with all of our stuff on campus. But then I would ask students to go into the security and privacy settings, and we would look at ad personalization, and it was turned on by default for all students. So my school was paying Google for the accounts for students to use, and then students were becoming a good profit source for Google as well, because Google was getting paid for the customized, targeted, personalized ads that they were able to feed to all students. And once I explained to students what ad personalization was and how it worked and why it did what it did, most everyone kind of got a terrified look in their eyes and went and flipped the setting off real quick. The text that's on the slide right now, those are all phrases that Google has used over the past few years to describe what ad personalization does. And this is their way of phrasing things so that I should kind of hesitate to turn it off. They're trying to make ad personalization sound enticing. And I want to highlight that word useful up there. And this could just be me, but I have never once thought that a good, effective ad was useful to me. You come up with a reason to trick me into parting with my hard-earned money. I don't think that's useful. That's manipulative. I don't appreciate that. I am hugely anti-ad. I'm one of those people who tries to block absolutely everything. If you are a company that gets profit from advertising, you hate me, and I apologize. It doesn't work well for me. But if Google is trying to tell us that personalized ads are useful, I want to challenge that, because an effective ad is one that the user doesn't realize is working. An effective ad is one that distracts the user from what they're actually trying to do. And if we're working with students and we want them to be thinking about something, learning about something, researching something, and they go, ooh, look, something shiny, the ad, and they click on the ad instead, that is distracting them, that is not useful. I would argue that no educational system should ever have ad personalization turned on, because that is going to be antithetical to the point of what we're trying to use these systems to do. I also wonder if so let's put the ad thing to the side for a quick second. Personalization for learning technologies often means we're going to have the system figure out where the student is and what they know and what they need next, and personalize their content and their engagement so that they are kind of walked through a path to get to the ultimate intended destination. Got it. If we are personalizing our education systems, does that kind of sort of set up students to be used to a personalized system so that after they leave education, they go into systems like these in the real world, they are more trained to be more accustomed to personalized ads, that sort of thing? I don't really think I have a good way of testing that one, and I don't have a good answer to that question, but in the back of my head, I feel like the more we try to customize and personalize and target the systems we create in education, the more we're going to kind of get students ready for that down the line. And there was also, some grad students from MIT just recently published an article about addictive AI and the coming threat of addictive AI. I think this is related, where if we are training people to expect our systems to understand us and to respond to us, we're going to lose our humanity. We're going to program our humanity right out of our systems. So I talked about place and empathy in our places a minute ago. So now I want to talk about empathy in our policies. I would say that well-constructed policies, whether we're talking education, nonprofits, governments, you name it, should be designed to bring the greatest benefit to the greatest number while protecting the needs of the marginalized. That's really, really tough to do. I think you just look at my Congress or your Parliament and see just how hard that is, and that's assuming that we look at them on a day when they work. Trying to find ways to benefit everyone while protecting everyone is a strange and difficult and delicate balance. If we're looking at the classroom environment, we have one instructor and dozens of students. By those numbers, the instructors are the minority, and the students should be the empowered, benefited majority. It's a really weird way of flipping it, and I'm not used to anyone who thinks of instructors in classrooms as being minorities. But if we are looking at, let's say, classroom policies, thinking of it in those terms does make a lot more sense to help us design policies that do what they're designed to do. So for instance, at the beginning of every semester, I start my syllabus blank. I don't write any policies for my classes. I ask students on day one to decide what policies they need in the syllabus and then write them accordingly. The example that I always love throwing out, I had a class one year that was right at the time when most students were having lunch. And so students came into class hungry, and the only thing that was on their mind when they walked into my room was how they could eat. And so the first policy they wanted was a food policy. It was, can we eat in class? Every other time I've asked students to do this, first one is attendance, second one is grading. This one class, first policy, food. All right. And their policy, the policy that they designed became, we can eat, we can bring in food, we can do stuff that doesn't make noise, doesn't stink, that sort of thing. The idea was we established the need, students needed access to food, and then from there they developed the protections. So we checked to make sure nobody had any allergies in class. I think somebody was allergic to strawberries or something unusual there. And so we put in the policy, you can't bring strawberries into class. But the policy was you can bring food. We encouraged that because we knew that if students had access to food, they would actually engage with class better. And by creating that policy in that one class, I kind of won their trust really quickly. And we created an environment where they all felt cared for because they knew that they had their needs met, including the people who had allergies or didn't like smelly food or whatever. We agreed no one was going to bring in fried chicken or something, because who can resist the smell of, that whole thing. So I've been doing this for about a decade now, where I have students write their own policies, and I've learned a couple of things. First of all, students expect policies in course syllabi to be punitive, arbitrary, and unrelated to learning. My favorite example is the standard attendance policy that I see at schools in the US. You're allowed three, what are they called? Unexcused. You're allowed 3 unexcused absences, and then the teacher starts deducting 10 points per day. Which I think is insane, because that's double jeopardy, because if you've missed class, then you're already going to be behind, and so why are we taking additional points off because you missed class, whatever. But also, why do we agree that 3 unexcused absences is a magic number? That seems to be standard across many institutions I've worked at. I've got a lot of classes that meet once a week. If you miss 3 days of class, that's almost a month that you've got problems to deal with, in addition to whatever kept you out of class. Students are used to this, and our grading policies can be just as insane. The other thing that I've learned is that students actually want an education that looks a lot different from what we tend to offer them. For example, in a writing class, when we talk about grading and that sort of thing, students don't actually want to be graded. Shocking, who knew? But if we take that seriously and don't grade them, things work really well, and things work a lot differently if we can get grades out of the equation. In a writing class, I've learned that students want three things. They want improvement-based feedback on their work. They want to know how they can get better. They also want to get reassurance that they're on the right track, because they're used to that with grades. Grades effectively tell them whether they are doing the right thing. And then students also want options for recovery in case they aren't on the right track. So what that looks like in my class, in casual conversation, I talk about it in terms of thumbs up, thumbs down. If your assignment was successful, you get a thumbs up. It did what it needed to do. And in a writing class, we pay attention to the effect that a document has. So if it was successful, thumbs up, great. And then I will give you feedback anticipating revisions, so you can tell me, so we can have a conversation about how to make it work better and do what it was you were trying to do. If it didn't work, then I give students guidance and help them figure out what to do to make the assignment meet its goals. We don't grade anything. If a student just wants to pass, they get thumbs up across the board and relax. If a student wants that A+++++, then they come and have conversation with me and keep revising their papers and make them better and better. It works great, and it keeps the focus off of grades and onto the quality of writing. So I would assert here that if we create class policies that are rooted in students' needs instead of faculty demands, we can actually restore participation in our classes, regardless of what modality we're using. Class policies that serve the needs of students encourage them to engage and encourage them to participate. Another quick interlude. The curb cut effect is literally legendary in design circles. Back in the 1960s, Berkeley, California, students with polio were wheelchair bound or were confined to wheelchairs and unable to access a lot of Berkeley and a lot of their classes because the infrastructure just did not support wheelchairs. So some renegades, like disability activists basically, went in and carved ramps into the curbs in Berkeley, California in the middle of the night without getting permits or anything like that. They didn't ask, they just did because they saw a need and understood the benefit of it. Chopped away at all the curbs, made ramps at intersections, and made the town accessible to wheelchairs. We now see these little bumpy mats on most of those curb cuts. The benefit or the concept of a curb cut effect is these are designed to allow wheelchairs access to curbs and streets, but they had outsized effects. People who are mobility impaired or visually impaired using a cane can detect the bumps on these and know when they're about to approach a curb. If someone is, let's say, skateboarding down the sidewalk, I don't know if you're supposed to do that around here, but if you are doing that, those bumps kind of prevent you from flying into traffic. They also help if someone's pushing a stroller or luggage, that sort of thing. They benefit the general population, not just the population that they were intended for. So I want to suggest that similar approaches could apply to education and learning technology design so that we could have the curb cut effect in the way we build our tools. So I want to talk about empathy in our platforms and the way that we can make website accessibility apply in a classroom. And I'm checking my time and I'm realizing that this is probably not going to work well, and then this slide also doesn't look right, so I'm just going to fly through this. Oh, yeah, great. I swear that was supposed to look a lot better. Skip through that. Here we go. Take my word for it. There are ways to take website accessibility standards and apply them to class design. It's a great conversation. You would have loved it, but we'll move along. So I want to cut to the chase, pretend that those are aligned on the screen. Technology that encourages rich interaction, emotional validation, and meaningful connection is the kind of technology that I want to advocate for, where we could build our tools to do those things and keep people at the core of all that we do. The basic idea is I want to prioritize kindness and connection over features and like what our tools are able to do. Instead of getting distracted by the technology, I want the technology to allow us to connect better with one another. And this one's going to kill me because it's supposed to be The idea was to have nice, neat icons that told that like you could pin your brain on and it'll help you organize what you're thinking. It was great. So 5 basic principles behind humane technology. Disciplinarity, transparency, agnosticism, openness, and fidelity. And I'm just going to skip this slide because it's not going to help anybody at this point. So we'll go one at a time here. This is Dolly the Maltipoo. Dolly clearly wants to become a bee. If we want to help Dolly achieve her goals, we need to teach her how to do bee things and how to become a bee, right? So being a little bit less silly and bringing this into the classroom, if I'm going to use technology in a class, I want to use technology in a way that my discipline uses technology. This is admittedly a lot easier to say from a higher ed perspective than it is from, let's say, a K-12 or elementary perspective. But if I'm going to use tech, I want to teach students how to use that tech in a way that people in my field use that tech. So it's my job to show how writing scholars use technology. It's somebody else's job to teach students how a biologist uses technology. And if we keep disciplinarity at the heart of the way we use tech, it's going to show students how tech is actually useful in the real world, and it gives more purpose behind what they're learning. The folks in the audience who are going to hate me now are the ones who design learning management systems, because I'm going to argue that the more time you spend learning an LMS, let me rephrase that. Time spent learning an LMS is time wasted in education because LMS navigation and operation doesn't transfer out of education. But something like WordPress or any publication platform is going to be more transferable because that's something that you would experience in the real world. Platforms like Teams or Slack work really great in classrooms for collaboration and communication, and those are tools that people do use in a professional environment. So, let's spend more time teaching students how to use those interfaces because they're going to have benefits outside the classroom. This is Huey, and I know this because the folks who post the photos actually name the dogs that they're taking pictures of, which I love. This is Huey. Huey understands that the pig that Huey is chewing on is functionally equivalent to a ball. From the dog's perspective, like, they don't care that it looks like a pig. That makes us laugh, and that's about it. Transparency in our tools means we are helping students understand the function that those tools provide, what those tools really do, rather than, let's say, the reason we've decided to adopt it. Something as simple, let me give you an example of encrypted communication. End-to-end encryption for our chats and that sort of thing. Really complicated mathematics go on behind the scenes to make those work. Our computers are doing lots of fancy stuff to actually encrypt things. But if we give students a basic layperson understanding of how end-to-end encryption works, it allows them to ask questions that are more meaningful, like who holds the keys to these decryption schemes? Where are those keys stored? How are they safely exchanged in the first place? Or another example I like to use is two-factor authentication. If students understand what's happening there and why we use those, they can better understand kind of why we're making them jump through those silly hoops. One last quick example, talking about secure web pages, HTTPS and that sort of thing, letting students know how the internet works, and I mean like packet addressing and the fact that things go from one server to another. A lot of students don't understand the basics of how internet traffic works. Getting them to understand that then lets them understand why encryption is important, and then pay more attention to that and ask more relevant questions. So helping students know what our tools ultimately do in terms that make sense to them means that they're going to get more meaningful learning from those tools. Next one is agnosticism, not using a particular platform just because, but letting students know that platforms are interoperable, that students can use whatever solution they want to use. The image that I have on the screen here is a number 2 pencil. Number 2 pencils are ubiquitous in education, especially in cases where we use multiple choice tests and auto-scored, that sort of thing, auto-scored test responses. We demand number 2 pencils because the machines need it, not because any teacher ever cares. Like, does anybody notice the difference in types of graphite? Unless you really like, I don't know, especially soft lead in your pencils or whatever. We have adopted this standard because the machines need it, not because any person needs it. And if we writing teachers are notoriously guilty for demanding that students turn in papers in 12-point Times New Roman, double-spaced, with 1-inch margins all around, just because. And I start asking students why that's the standard, and they just shrug and say, just because. And then by the time they get into higher education, and I say, we're in a writing class, trying to get them to think about writing and professions and whatnot, I say, well, what font should you use? Why would you want to double space this? And they've just never had to think through those questions. So by the time they get to me, if I'm saying make a document designed for anything other than an MLA manuscript, they've just never considered it, and they have been disempowered from the ability to make meaningful choices regarding the design of their work. Openness is also is the next key critical component to humane technology. I want to say that a lot of times our technology disempowers students. If we require a sign-on to get into a system, we can dissuade a student from going through the process, like library access. I always want students to use our library. We pay a lot of money to get access to library materials and all of that. But if a student's using a mobile device and they have to jump through login hoops, or they have to use a proxy server or something like that, that process can dissuade them from using our actual systems. They decide to go search for something on Google instead. And it kind of like, it teaches them that school isn't working for them. It teaches them to use other solutions instead, which I think kind of defeats the point of what we're trying to go for. We also, wow, lost track of things once again. Love this, I apologize. I clearly needed more coffee this morning. I think my brain still thinks it's like 5 in the morning. Open education resources do help solve this problem, but helping students learn to create materials that are openly available is another way to help encourage openness in our educational products. If we have students create materials that are openly available, instead of just being turned in for the teacher, it kind of establishes the idea of creating content for open engagement rather than in these little walled gardens of our learning management system that doesn't benefit anybody else. And we start teaching students that their ideas can engage with others and actually generate conversation rather than just generating a grade. And my last point about humane technology is fidelity, which is what is completely backfiring on me this morning, where I'm using one particular file format and it's not working with what we need for these systems. My basic point is if we keep our data in its original format as long as possible, we can come up with content, we can have content that is more workable and usable longer through the workflow process and have students be able to get to the material in terms that work for them. So, simple example for you, screen reader technology is great for folks with visual disabilities, but a lot of our online communications, especially in social threads and that sort of thing, relies on screenshots, which forces the viewer to see things in the terms of whoever posted it, rather than allowing the device to choose what font, what contrast, what size works best for that user. The more we can allow the end user to control the display of information, the better off we are. So fundamentally, humane technology helps empower students, giving them control over their workflows, their tools, their data. And we as technologists, as teachers, need to stand up for the rights of students. We need to force ourselves upon the world and reduce demands from students or of student data, or reducing demands of students to make them use certain workflows just because. I say force ourselves upon the world. That's stealing a phrase from those folks back in Berkeley, California, who forced themselves upon the world by cutting those curbs and the sidewalks to make their environment work for the people that they were trying to stand up for. I wonder why we don't have an IRB, an institutional review board for technology adoptions. If anybody does research in higher ed, you have to get approval through your institutional review board before you do any research on human subjects. I've never heard of anything like that for a technology adoption, even though our technology tools often know more about our students, as in subjects, than any research project I've ever seen. I wonder how many privacy violations or database hacks and all of that we need to go through before we start realizing we should hold our technology to a similar standard as a research study. And one last lovely animation. So again, I want to encourage us to apply empathy to learning technologies across the board, keeping in mind that all of our learning happens in a specific place, that our policies should be designed to help students and protect the outnumbered faculty, and that our platforms should be designed with empathy in mind to allow human connection, to encourage us to actually be able to care for one another in ways that we often are discouraged from because we are blocked by our devices. Yeah, so if you take anything else from everything I've said today, I want you to remember this one, that for education to be truly successful, it needs to help students see their learning and their development as self-motivated, self-determined, and intrinsically rewarding. We need to put students in the driver's seat and give them control over their own technology and over the way that they interact with their technology. I want to challenge each of us to build, adopt, and implement learning technologies that are intentionally and fundamentally humane. And I think at this point, we're opening it up for Q&A, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was really interesting. I think it very much hits for me the reviewing, reflecting, and reimagining element of the conference. We've got about just under 10 minutes for questions. Does anybody in the room have a question before I look at VVox? Yes, over there in the middle. Thanks, Katie.
Hi, Chris. Donald. So one of the things that the Berkeley activists did was work very carefully and closely with the city council. Very quickly after it was decided that the curb cuts were needed. You talked a lot about individual teachers' responsibilities to pay attention to and care for their students. What sorts of things are you doing to join up your individual practices with institutional policy and maybe even cross-institutional policy so that it's not just about individual action, but actual systemic change?
Just to clarify, are you asking what am I personally doing or what would I recommend doing?
I would be happy to hear from both.
So faculty, and this would apply especially to folks with tenure. I would argue that the point of tenure is to allow faculty to be able to stand up for those who don't have the same level of privilege and ability and access and that sort of thing. So the more established someone becomes in the education system, the more they should be able to be involved in university senates and other administrative committees and that sort of thing. And being a voice reflecting the needs of students in whatever committee meetings we end up being on, I think is one of those absolutely essential jobs of faculty. So for instance, if I happen to be the nerd in my department, everybody comes to me for tech questions and that sort of thing. Whenever I go to faculty meetings of some kind, I'm always the one who has to say, yes, but if we make this decision, it's going to take power away from the students, or we're rolling out a new student contact system, and folks are getting excited because we're able to see when a student has read an email. And I said, yeah, that's surveillance. Are we okay surveilling our students, and do we want to let them know that we are able to track those things, or are we trying to do this on the sly? Standing up for what the institution is doing, kind of using student data and letting students know what we're doing with their data, I think is one of those things that faculty have the ability to do, and we often don't realize that we have a responsibility to make sure everyone knows what's happening. So the, I guess, long-winded way of coming around to that when we are in any conversation or any, collaborative environments, the word I'm looking for. When we're in any collaborative environment, we need to make sure that we allow for that dialogue and encourage that dialogue that lets everyone at the table know exactly what's happening, and advocate for what would best protect and help what students need in the situation. Does that work?
Thank you. I think maybe we should turn to that top question on VVox. Aren't EdTech professionals also disempowered by EdTech?
I saw that on the screen, and that's a great question that I'm honestly unfamiliar with, because I don't work in that sector, and so I'm not a good person to speak to that question. I think that's a great thing to, like, we don't have time, unfortunately, to throw it to the floor, but I would love to hear from folks, like, in what ways do EdTech professionals get disempowered? But I also suspect that our first question speaks to that issue as well. If EdTech professionals are being disempowered in their professional environments, there is some kind of communication that is being blocked, or there's some kind of awareness that isn't able to go through in the decision-making process that would need to be addressed.
Thank you. Are there any more questions in the room before I work through VVox? Yes, in the back there. Oh, man.
Hi, Roger Emery. There's quite a lot in the press at the moment of banning mobile phones at schools, and France is just doing an experiment banning mobile phones in schools for up to 15-year-olds. How does that feel for you as a conflict between your wish to bring the real world into the classroom, and yet we're banning the real world from the classroom?
Honestly, I appreciate the way you phrased the question. You're predicting the answer in the way that you worded that, because that's exactly what we're doing here. It interests me. A lot of students in my intro to writing classes are future teachers. They're training to get teacher certification for K-12 education. And I ask students a variation of that same question. And most students in my classes say, oh, we shouldn't allow students to have technology in the classroom. We shouldn't be giving them tablets. We shouldn't let them have a mobile phone until they're older. Because they basically give some variation of the, oh, kids today. And I look at them and I laugh and I say, what? Who's the kid here? And that brings up the question of when is the right time to introduce people to a particular tool or device or technology or platform or whatever. And what I would argue is when a student is given, or a child is given access to a tool, they need to understand what that tool does, what it is, and what its potential dangers are. And a lot of students in my classes talk about distraction from notifications, for instance, as being one of the primary problems with using mobile phones in the classroom. And they say until they learn how to manage those notifications, things are problematic. So as we introduce new tools, helping students know what the potential problems are, giving them practice with it, and helping them learn to use those tools responsibly is I think, the only way it can work. We need to let them know the risks and the benefits, and again, help them practice, help them figure out how to do it correctly. I know a number of faculty who aren't terribly good at putting down their devices and their notifications and all that during meetings or what have you. But at the same time, if we force everyone to put everything away, it's not going to solve any additional problems, because how does life work these days without having access to our devices? We need to, instead of learning how to focus just on, the tabletop that's in front of us and not the internet, we need to learn to build the skills of integrating the two. So yeah, I'm definitely not in favor of technology bans, but it does involve work, effort, and conversation to develop the maturity and the skills to use them correctly. What is school for if not to build habits and maturity and responsibility?
Thanks, Chris. We had one question at the back there, and then I'll hopefully have time to just take one more off VVox.
Thank you. Hi, Valley from the University of Edinburgh. I was really interested on your comments on openness and not only creating OER for students to use, but actually collaborating and encouraging students to create open education. Open education is actually what I do, and we have a lot of different open education in the curriculum projects. So I was just interested in what exactly you're doing with your students in open education. Are you teaching them to create OER and share OER, and is that being assessed as well?
So first off, if you don't work in open education circles, the Open Ed Conference is a great place to start looking, and I want to put a shout out to, it's an old book, but 2004, Lawrence Lessig's Free Culture. If open education, the concept is unfamiliar, great random and unrelated ways to get into it. To directly answer your question, again, writing classes. So I ask students as a final assignment at the end of the semester, one of them, to create a chapter for a textbook for the class that they just took. And this has been one of the most rewarding assignments I've ever come up with, where all they're doing is they're picking something that's interesting to them, but this becomes a real writing assignment with a real audience and real stakes behind it. They need to take a concept from class and explain it to someone who is about to take that same class. And now they see themselves as an expert because they have successfully completed the class. So they are going to explain it to the next generation of students coming through. They get to do it in terms that are familiar to students. So it's no longer, professor speak. It's more accessible. And they're able to include little mental tips or tricks that help them learn whatever the concept was. So they feel empowered and valuable as an author. They also understand their audience because they can connect and relate. And my job then becomes to emphasize the difference between them as expert and their audience as novice, and to draw that out and to make them feel more empowered, responsible, that sort of thing. It is a ridiculously simple assignment with, in my mind, very low stakes, but in their mind, it's a big deal because they have a real audience. And I've had a number of students, once we publish I use press books for a lot of these, and once we publish the final book, the students are amazed at how their work looks real, to use their words. It looks more professional and more polished and that sort of thing. A little shameless self-promotion. If you go to books.chrisfriend.us, we've got a collection of all the stuff that I've had students come up with over the years. They are unpolished, so if you go in there and expect something like, publication quality that's not there. I even have a couple of chapters that I've put on the menu of options for homework reading, and students have come back to class saying, we were surprised at all the typos that were in it, or we were surprised that it didn't sound quite right. It was unpolished and they knew that. But the student said that actually lent credibility to the text, because in this particular case, the student was writing about how American edited English should not be the only kind of writing that we accept from students. Students should be able to use their own form of language whenever they communicate, that whole thing. And so to see a student write in less than perfect English, if you will, that made her point better. And so students felt connected with the text in ways that they simply don't when they're reading stuff written by another colleague of mine or whatnot. So yeah, books.chrisfriend.us, take a look around. It's great seeing what students come up with because it's interesting, generative, purposeful, that whole thing.
Thank you. We're about due to go into the break now, but I just wondered if you could quickly answer that first question on there. What one question should we be asking ed tech companies before using their tech?
It's probably cheating to say, what is your tech actually doing? Where does the money come from? That's another good one. The one I want to ask, which is a little bit too snarky that I don't think I can get away with, is what is your plan for when your database gets hacked and all of our students' data gets released to the dark web? I really want to ask that question. I honestly think the one question we need, I'm going to cheat and say two. What does the tech actually do? Because we all know that marketing works to get people excited about a particular feature, but the basic functionality of a particular tool is something we all need to be clear about before we get excited about the new bells, whistles, features, whatever. So what is it fundamentally doing? How does it work? That's the first question I ask. And then the second one is, where do you get your money? Because if we at an education institution are contracting with a company, we need to know how their funding model works so that we understand who they're beholden to, and we need to know what it is they are going to get paid to do well, and what it is that's going to, forgive the language, but piss off the funding agency and where those boundaries are and that sort of thing. So what do you actually do? Where do you get your money?
Thank you, Chris. There's lots on VVox, and I'm sure in the room that we want to continue discussing in the break, which is coming. But can we once again thank Chris for his presentation? In case I wasn't clear, it's a break now, so go and get coffee.